I'm very honored to welcome also our moderator, Anna Wieslander, who is the Director for Northern Europe and Future Europe Initiative at the Atlantic Council from Sweden. Anna, thank you for being here with us, and thank you for moderating this wonderful panel. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, and lovely to be here. I think the main focus of this session is to explore the opportunities that women's service create, both for female soldiers and for the armed forces. Which important steps have already been taken, and what do we need to do to improve in the years to come? We have an excellent range of speakers covering a range of allies and partners, I should say, from the US, UK, Belgium, Germany, and Sweden with us to share their various perspectives and insights on this topic. And I myself, I'm a bit intrigued by the title here, Promoting Meaningful Participation of Women in the Armed Forces, what the speakers make of meaningful participation. I'm curious to hear. To frame this discussion, just a few figures. I checked out a NATO report on gender perspectives in preparing for this. In 2017, 11.1% were women in the armed forces among NATO allies, and this includes all active duty military personnel. Positions, as I have understood, are nowadays open for combat in all NATO member states, but still most women are found in other sectors, staff positions, medical services, logistics, communications, but also infantry, and I think we will hear a bit more about that. If you look at if the numbers are increasing, if 2016 compared to 2017, 18 allies reported that there had been an increase in female recruitment. 3 reported that there was no difference, and actually in 7 ally member states it was decreasing. And also when I looked at 2016, this was the number. So it's increasing, but it's not, a steady climb like that. We still have some way to go, I would say. And I look forward to discussing some of these things. If you look at if it's 1 out of 10, more or less an average, still perhaps we need to motivate again and again why women are needed in the armed forces. What's the need? What's the purpose of it? Recruiting more women. How do we do it, and how do we make them stay and not leave after a while? That's also important to discuss. Which positions do women assume, and what's the rank that they are able to reach? And finally, one issue is about how to handle sexual abuse and harassment efficiently. And that does not only, that's not only something that women are victims of. According to this report, though, 92% women, 8% men. So there is a gender perspective also to this issue, and perhaps we could address that as well. So I'm honored to introduce to you our speaker for the opening remarks, Dr. Denise Natali, who is Assistant Secretary, Department of State, Bureau of Conflict and Stabilization Operations, United States. Welcome. Welcome.
Good afternoon. Okay. I'd like to thank the organizers of the Warsaw Security Forum for hosting such an important event, and for the government of Poland for graciously inviting me to speak here today. It's reassuring to see that an entire session is being focused on women, peace, and security, which signals that this is not just an issue about women, but an international security priority. The Trump administration is committed to empowering women as a key step toward realizing peace, security, and prosperity. This includes protecting the rights of women and girls, advancing women's equality, promoting women and youth empowerment programs, and supporting women in leadership and decision-making positions. President Trump codified his commitment to including women as equal partners in promoting peace and security when he signed the Women, Peace, and Security Act of 2017. This is the first legislation of its kind anywhere in the world. Last week at the UN General Assembly high-level ministerial in New York, which I attended, the President reaffirmed his commitment when he stated, "Nations that empower women are much wealthier, safer, and much more politically stable." I'm proud to note that the United States has further renewed its leadership on this issue by releasing the 2019 U.S. Strategy on Women, Peace, and Security in this past June. Our Women, Peace, and Security strategy recognizes the distinct role that women play as agents of change in mitigating and resolving conflict, and countering terrorism and violent extremism, and stabilizing post-conflict societies. This includes assisting partner governments adopt policies to improve women's participation in security sector forces, such as peacekeeping, military, and law enforcement organizations. The idea that empowering women enhances opportunities to prevent violent conflict is certainly not a new one. Numerous studies show that violent conflicts can be better mitigated and resolved when women are meaningfully consulted and participate in political and decision-making processes. For example, when women in civil society participate in peace negotiations, the resulting peace agreement is 64% less likely to fail. We also know that as a percentage of women in parliament increases by 5%, a state is 5 times less likely to use violence when faced with an international crisis. There's also a clear link between women's participation in the security sector, and more specifically, the armed forces, that merits further attention. This link is particularly important given the nature of conflicts today, the operating environments that we work in, and the issues that we are dealing with, which are more complex than traditional warfare. In particular, I'd like to highlight 3 key benefits to expanding women's participation in the armed forces. First is greater military operational effectiveness. Secondly, the protection of civilians. And third, stabilization. First, women's participation in leadership in the armed forces bolsters operational effectiveness. Women can broaden the understanding of operating environments and the capability of military units to gather intelligence and analyze local conditions. They can also improve a unit's relationship with the community and access local women in societies where all male units cannot. For example, research has shown that female police are more likely than their male colleagues to de-escalate tensions and less likely to use excessive force, and that local women are more likely to report violence to female officers. When military organizations are able to consult with the women and girls that they serve, it can also result in substantive and lasting gains for peace and security. Second, women's participation in the armed forces strengthens their ability to protect civilians, particularly women and girls who are disproportionately affected by conflict. Research has found that although women are less likely to take up arms, they die in higher numbers from war's indirect effects: the breakdown of social order, human rights abuses, the spread of infectious disease, and economic devastation. Enhancing civilian protection certainly entails more than increasing women's roles. It also requires institutional and cultural change. In some contexts, militaries can be the perpetrators of atrocities in conflict, such as sexual violence. Similarly, a country's armed forces can serve as a role model to communities in how they include and treat women. Militaries that have an institutionalized culture that respects women and girls and prevents sexual exploitation and abuse is considered more legitimate and credible to local populations. This in turn can lead to greater trust and open communications for early warning against potential conflict and atrocities. Third, when women participate in the armed forces, they also can advance stabilization. The United States defines stabilization as a political endeavor to create conditions in which locally legitimate actors can peacefully manage conflict. Effective stabilization, therefore, requires that we identify who these locally legitimate actors are. Women are an essential part of this effort. For example, in Somalia, my bureau has found that as a result of cross-clan marriages, women were well placed to mediate disputes between clans, which was a major source of local-level conflict in the country. This mediation role that they played allowed them to have access and influence to both their fathers' and husbands' clans, which then enabled us to move forward with stabilization efforts. Another example is how we support defections from terrorist groups, which is a key focus area of my bureau. In Yemen, for example, our implementing partner found that as mothers and wives, women are often the first to notice signs of radicalization in their families and potential recidivism. When engaged and consulted during the program design process, women enhanced the effectiveness of fighter defections and rehabilitation. Further, our Countering Violent Extremism Global Baselines program, and this is something that we are working across the globe to determine baselines of what resiliencies are to violent extremism. We found in the Western Balkans, for example, that community support for women's empowerment positively correlated with resilience to violent extremism. These findings are now informing the way that we are moving forward with stabilization and countering violent extremism effects. These examples demonstrate the importance of integrating the needs and perspectives of women in stabilization analysis and program planning, leading to a more comprehensive picture of local conditions and resiliencies to violent extremism. Increasing the number of women in the armed forces serves as a force multiplier for these locally informed and employed solutions to conflict, which is the basis of U.S. stabilization efforts. How then do we move forward? Despite the clear link that I've just discussed between women's meaningful participation in the security sector and prospects for stability, women are still significantly underrepresented. I'd like to highlight where we are prioritizing 3 efforts moving forward and some issues for further discussion during the panel discussion. First, we need to continue to press for the meaningful participation of women in decision-making processes relating to conflict, particularly security sector initiatives, such as the rule of law, law enforcement, and professional military education. Secondly, focus on integrating women's perspectives into program design, especially women local leaders as a critical component of peace building and conflict prevention and stabilization. And third, continue to track and assess the progress made, using metrics and indicators to determine how and if we are realizing our goals. This requires data that identifies where women are present and where they're not, what capacities they are in, and with what impact they are actually having. We must set a clear benchmark, a timetable, and hold ourselves accountable to the objectives that we set out in the Women, Peace, and Security Act. So I will close. I hope the panel has a fruitful discussion that can address some of these issues, and I very much look forward to hearing about the outcomes. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Well, thank you so much for that. Several interesting tracks there, I think, that we can build further on. I took down operational effectiveness, the protection of civilians, and to advance stabilization as a few, and to have meaningful process ahead, not least to track progress, I believe, and also include female perspectives in the design of programs and so on. So a lot of things to discuss. And I'm happy to welcome up, I think I will welcome up all our panelists, and then they will speak one after one, but if they could take their seats here. So first I would like to introduce Lieutenant Colonel Rupert Burridge from British Armed Forces, Human Security Lead from the 77th Brigade. Please, welcome up. And then Navy Commander Pascale van Leeuwen, who is with the Belgian Armed Forces and Commander for Mine Countermeasures Operational Sea Training at the center in Zeebrugge. Welcome. And then we have Surgeon General Dr. Almut Nolte from the German Armed Forces. Welcome. And last but not least, please, Colonel Ulf Jonsson, my countrymate, Swedish Defense Attaché to Poland. Welcome. You can sit there, and I think you can have this one. So I thought we would do it like this. I will start with Colonel Burridge. And ask you a question on, because one of the things that are discussed is, since we have this progress in female recruitment, but not very fast, one idea is to have a clear target, to set a quota. And I had a figure that you have a defense target in Britain that it's 15% of new recruits by 2020 must identify as female. In comparison then to the average of 11.1 in NATO. What is the British experience of having set goals for recruitment of women? Please.
Well, thank you very much for that question, and it's a real pleasure to address this panel. I'm obviously from the British Army, where I lead what we call a human security cell of 24 women and men, and me and the men and women I work with deliver special advisory, planning, operating and training capabilities across UK defence, other government departments, and indeed to our international partners. The majority of us are international military gender advisors as well, but in addition to women, peace and security, we also concern overlapping matters, children in armed conflict, protection of civilians, modern slavery, and human trafficking. And we have some overlap with NATO in that regard. So, as was commented right at the beginning, this panel is about the meaningful participation of women in the armed forces. And to me also, the executive word here is meaningful. Now, it's pointless to pretend there's not an element of messaging and optics in women, peace and security. And in some ways, that's to be desired, because projecting a positive image of women in the armed forces is evidently a driver for the further recruitment of women. However, in setting percentages for the gender makeup of any armed force, we have to ensure that we look beyond the raw statistics and ask ourselves what they actually mean. And in order to do that, it's helpful to quickly revise why military forces should concern themselves with their gender makeup. Now, I was recently in one of the Western Balkan countries, and it's commencing a large project to increase the percentage of women in its armed forces. Now, currently, that percentage is about 10%, and coincidentally, that's about the same as in the UK, and several other NATO countries too. Now, the driver for this country is actually emigration. As young men depart, that country needs to spread the recruiting catchment to 100% of its population, else it will not be able to have a fully manned armed forces. Now, that's an instrumental imperative, but it doesn't mean that it's not also a normative one. Now, in the UK, we've very recently opened up recruiting to the infantry and the cavalry, and the only roles in defence which are now gender specified are the very tiny number relating to countries that we go to where the socio-cultural situation requires that a job be done by either a woman or a man. These are a tiny number. So effectively, women can now apply to and serve in any position in UK defence. Now, in that our infantry, in particular, is indeed under-recruited, it could be said that we are doing this for a similarly instrumental reason. But in fact, in the UK, it's anticipated that only very small numbers of women will wish to serve in the infantry and indeed will be able to achieve the gender-neutral but high training and fitness standards. The primary reason that we've done this is, of course, a normative one, because it's the right thing to do, because, importantly, there's no reason not to do it. We also want to exploit our national talent pool, and that means that women and men must be afforded equal opportunities, and that doesn't always mean equal gender-specified conditions, for example, maternity leave, through the entirety of any military career to ensure that talent of any gender rises to the top. Now, there are also instrumental and normative reasons to ensure the meaningful participation of women on operations. The UK is committed to ensuring a minimum of 15% participation on UN missions, with a minimum of 6.5% in field roles. Now, our forthcoming upscaling of our contribution to the UN mission to Mali, which is based on a cavalry regiment, might seem testing in that regard. However, as our experience with with mixed engagement teams and female engagement teams in Iraq and Afghanistan has shown us, the meaningful participation of women in field roles enables us to better engage with and support those people that, after all, we were deployed to protect. As a way of considering seemingly military problems, the human security vantage constitutes a way of understanding more broadly and accordingly designing packages of soft and hard tactical effects which are more likely to achieve our desired operational and strategic end states. As we perform our values overseas and domestically to others and indeed to ourselves, ascription to positive gender transformations is very much in our own interests. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we can come back to that because you pose a very fundamental reason, I think, for having women in. It's a matter of the right thing to do, of having equal opportunities and getting the best ones on board, regardless of gender, and also reflecting that value when we serve, not only here but also abroad. Thank you very much for that. So I will move on to Navy Commander Van Leeuwen, and I had a reflection there when I checked on Belgium. The enlistment requirements in the armed forces differ from men and women. The physical fitness tests are identical, I heard, but the quota tables are somehow adopted, so they are gender neutral. I don't know if this is correct, but if you have anything to reflect on this, the pros and cons of having the same or different requirements for recruitment, that would be interesting to hear. But please, also your broader reflections on this issue.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I was also asked to talk about my own experience as women in armed forces. Therefore, your question will be included within my presentation.
Thank you.
So, my name is Pascale van Leeuwen, and I started my job as a naval officer in the operational service. This means that I run through the different functions up to commanding officer of a mine countermeasure vessel. This is also my specialization, mine countermeasures, or MCM. I participated in several MCM operations, especially in the Baltic Sea, took several times part with standing NATO MCM Group 1, and participated in the EU mission Atalanta against piracy. Today, I work as head of MOST, which is the MCM vessel's operational sea training unit, who is training and certifying MCM vessels coming from several NATO countries. In this context, one of my teams will fly to Poland next year in order to work together with the brand new Polish minehunter Cormoran. Some numbers for the Belgian Defense Forces. In total, we have 8.5% of women in our defense forces. Looking to the distribution within the armed forces, they are represented with 30% in our medical forces, but much less in the other armed forces. Navy, 11%, Air Force, 10%, and land forces, only 5.5%. To my opinion, This shows that most women choose a job that they feel related to. It's the same in the society. There are more male technicians and less male nurses. And this natural feeling cannot be ignored. But I think that defense forces should show more that a job in the naval forces, the land forces, or the air forces is not per definition a combat function, an idea that lives in the head of many women. In addition, operational functions are not the same as combat functions, another misunderstanding. For example, controlling the ship and her weapon systems is a perfect job for women. They might even be better if it's true that multitasking is a female thing. The spectrum of jobs is so broad, but maybe not enough known by possible female candidates. It's surprising that the job is not more attractive, especially because it's a job where men and women are equally paid. If we focus on the challenges that women encounter, I think that they can be grouped in 3 domains: practical challenges, physical challenges, and emotional challenges. Practical challenges. This might seem to be the easiest one, but has not always been the case. Some countries have different cultures where it's generally accepted that men and women share cabins on board. This is not the case in the Belgian Navy. So you have frictions, because female enlisted personnel are getting 2-person cabins instead of their male colleagues who are sleeping with 6 or 12. And the same dismay may arise when showers and toilets are allocated. A trivial example within my own experience. The first time I went on board as a student, all toilets allocated to the ratings were situated in one room. And the only shield between the different toilets was a curtain. Can you imagine a curtain on board of a ship? So each time the ship pitched or rolled, the curtain followed the same movement. So not a very comfortable situation during a private matter. So as a result, I was allowed to use the toilet of the officers. But this extra comfort was not priceless, because my male colleagues considered this as a preferred treatment. The point that I want to make here is that we should think twice before giving privileges as a solution for practical problems. Very often, other solutions are also available. Then we have the physical challenges. In my job, by far the easiest. My male colleagues don't show any admiration when I run 3,000 meters for a Cooper test, which I can't. But however, their respect increases if I'm able to stay awake for hours, or to wake up at any time of the night, or to keep on working, even when I'm seasick. In this case, at least, I was able to fight with the same weapons as they do. In Belgian Defense Forces, the barometers for annual sport tests are different for male and female. This is now starting slowly, step by step, to be generally accepted. The functional physical tests, for example, to become a paratrooper or a diver, are the same for men and women. At one hand, this seems to be a fair solution. For several combat functions, a certain physical level is required for the security of themselves and the team they are working with. At the other hand, these groups too need to take the gender aspects into consideration when they are preparing a mission. It might even be the reason of success for the mission. So women are of great value in their teams too. Last challenge, the emotional one, is for me the biggest one. In particular, missing the children. Women are used to take care of their children, especially when they are babies. I had the experience to embark for a 4-month during mission when my eldest son just became 1 year. And this was hard. And yes, I cried when I was driving the car to Zeebrugge, where I was embarking. And I made several attempts to cross the gangway because I definitely didn't want anyone to see me crying. But now, 20 years later, I can testify that I'm happy that I did it. During this mission, I learned that I was not indispensable at home, and that fathers on board felt the same emotions. I also learned that my husband was almost perfectly capable of taking care of my son. We women should talk about this and support each other. It's a bridge we can cross. Maybe starting with short missions and definitely investing in social media to keep contact with home, something that everyone benefits from. And besides, more and more fathers are raising the children. It's not a typical female problem anymore. I also want to stress that several steps have been made already. For Belgium, the Security Council Resolution 1325 resulted in a national Belgian plan, which on her turn was transformed into a defense action plan on women, peace and security. In here, actions are described that need to be taken by the different directorates of the armed forces. For the external part of the resolution, the formation in gender aspects is now executed on 3 levels. First, the gender dimensions are since 2006 integrated in the basic education of all military personnel. Secondly, during a pre-deployment training, the gender team, adapted to the operational theater, is treated for, again, all military personnel. I talked to the CEO of one of our frigates about the picking up of refugees in the Mediterranean Sea some years ago. And he told me he was happy having received this pre-deployment training where the gender aspect was treated. But especially, he was very happy to have several women on board, among which the medical, who were part of the reception team of the refugees, what made the mission successful. On the third level, more and more people are formed as a gender advisor. Those are the specialists. We are talking in Belgium of a course of only 2 weeks. Compared to legal advisors, cultural advisors, and other advisors, it's still the little brother of the advisors. But it's a starting point. We have to work with well-prepared baby steps. Otherwise, it's too abrupt and it may cause gender fatigue. For the internal part of the resolution, first step to achieve is a common understanding of gender equality and gender equity. We need the whole organization to share the same point of view. There are many false stories about it. It does not mean that women need to become men, and it does not mean positive discrimination. The definitions of both terms are given by UNESCO. Gender equality. Equality between men and women does not mean that women and men have to become the same, but that their rights, their responsibilities and opportunities will not depend on whether they were born male or female. Gender equity means fairness of treatment for men and women according to their respective needs. This may include equal treatment or treatment that is different, but which is considered equivalent in terms of rights, benefits, obligations, and opportunities. Up to us to spread the word. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I thought that was very rich and interesting, and also a mix with sharing your personal reflections on that. Especially, I was thinking the preferred treatment. You said that was an interesting way of dealing with this. Don't give the privilege, but solve it in a different way. Think practically about it.
Yes, because it put women in a difficult position too. They don't ask for this neither. So other people are giving these privileges and you don't want it, and your colleagues are really looking at you because, yes, they feel like you are preferred.
Exactly. I've heard that from several, actually. I think that's a really important point. And also thank you for categorizing the challenges, practical, physical, emotional. I think that's also very useful. And we will move on here, and as we heard here also, one sector where there are more women is the medical sector, and I'm looking here at our next speaker, Dr. Almut Nolte, who was one of the first women of this career path in Germany, and now it has increased quite substantially during your service. So what does this mean for you as a woman, a role model in this sector in order to increase the amount of women in the Bundeswehr, and what is your personal story in this? Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you for your question. Szanowni panie, szanowni panowie, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great honor for me to speak to you today about this important topic, and I'm looking forward to an intensive exchange of experiences with you all. 29 years of service in the German Armed Forces is a very long time for me, during which much has changed in the Bundeswehr and in Europe. Looking back at this development and the chances offered by women in the armed forces, I see most different experiences that I would like to share with you. First, I was the first of 100 female soldiers that were recruited by the Bundeswehr after the career of medical officers had been opened for women. That means I'm a real witness of that time. Second, in 2015, I built up a staff element to our former Minister of Defense, Ursula von der Leyen, now President of the European Commission, that has developed a comprehensive situation picture of women in the Bundeswehr and which removes career obstacles. This provided me with a lot of systematic insights. Third, as a commander of the largest military hospital, I'm responsible for the mission accomplishment of my women and men, and I want to bring to bear their capabilities and potentials unrestrictedly. But let's get back to the beginnings. First, we as female soldiers were some sort of exotic species that was treated with excessive caution, particular strengths, sometimes also with too much attention or doubts about our performance. At that time, the standard for military mission achievement was clearly male. What unsettled me was a lack of female role models. I did not question all this, but I simply considered it my personal task to prove the opposite. That could only be compensated through outstanding hardly work, a mechanism that I still recognize in some of my female soldiers today and that deserves more critical attention. In 2001, after a decision by the European Court of Justice, women were also admitted to all other careers in the Bundeswehr. Meanwhile, the share of women in the medical service has already increased to 45%, whereas it is only 8.4% in the other armed services. Interestingly enough, a major sociological study in 2014 revealed some phenomena of assimilation and polarization instead of real integration. It is also my personal experience that it will take a share of 20 to 30% women to be able to develop fair framework conditions. That often offer women the same opportunities to participate and contribute to shaping their working environment. And it's not only about childcare and flexible working hours, although this is very important for both women and men, even if this means a real challenge for military superiors. It is rather also about various role models, about equal access to information, about conceptual participation, about a fair distribution of projects and special tasks, because these provide for substantial development opportunities and a positive image among superiors. And of course, it's about fair evaluations as a basic for personal decision. This will not be successful without the top executive level's commitment and expectation towards all superiors. If we want to make better use of the valuable potential of women that I observe every day in the hospital and during their deployment to missions, abroad and exercises, it is imperative to have male and female superiors and their readiness to lead with clear objectives, with offer room for individual solutions. And this is exactly what German mission-type tactics requires, which, other than order-type tactics, emphasize the individual soldier's responsibility. Normal togetherness as a basic prerequisite for armed forces with a future-proof body of personnel is only possible with a sufficiently large share of women from which command personnel can be recruited. Integration is achieved only when we don't have to talk about it anymore. The Bundeswehr is undertaking massive efforts to raise the superiors' awareness for reviewing selection procedures and evaluations with a view to increase the share of women by special career opportunities. This positive development can be observed especially in the medical service, which wouldn't be able to fulfill its mission without women and which has an increasing number of female superiors. We also know that, for example, in comparison with successful commercial enterprises, that diversely composed teams are particularly successful due to the broader range of skills, experiences, and courses of action. In the changing security political context in Europe, we are experiencing an increase in the spectrum of scenarios that would require military action. However, we will not be able to train any possible situation sufficiently in advance. Mixed military teams, where appreciation of different skills prevails, enhance the flexibility of military response, and therefore offer more courses of action. Moreover, it is especially female soldiers in theater of operation who strengthen the trust between the local population and the armed forces. Quite often they find easier access to endangered ethnic groups. Last not least, armed forces, where the daily coexistence of women and men at home is characterized by trust and mutual respect, will have different view towards women in the countries of deployment. What matters is the actual footprint of female soldiers in their armies, not just their numbers. Therefore, I'm deeply convinced that the key to success is appreciation and normality of diversity and not the emphasis of divisive categories. Let me conclude with a quote from the two-time Nobel Prize winner Marie Curie, who said, "I've learned that the way of progress is neither swift nor easy. Nevertheless, Marie Curie shaped the future courageously and persistently. So let no one discourage us from shaping the future." Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Nolte, for lifting up, I think, very well elaborating on the importance of role models to increase and also to step by step have a sufficient mass of women and what that can mean in order to build also not broadly but also upwards, I think, on the ranks, that we need to see this as a bit step-by-step stone building in that sense, and I think that's crucial. And also successful teams are diverse, as you say, and I think what we've heard now on work-family balance, these are of course perhaps put to the extreme sometimes in the armed forces, but it's also part of a wider discussion in society on gender equality, also men involved in families more and more, and childcare and so on. So I think that comes with a broader development in society as well. Thank you so much for that. And then we will end up with Sweden, partner country, not NATO ally. But I was going to ask the Colonel, Sweden has reintroduced conscription, we can say, and gender neutral such.
Yes.
What difference do you think that can make in recruiting more women to the armed forces?
Well, Anna, thank you for letting me into this panel in a late stage. This is an area of very high interest for the Swedish Armed Forces, as you probably know. I will try to answer this question in a broad perspective and try to save some time for some questions too here. The Swedish, first a little bit of a strategic outlook. The Swedish Armed Forces defend Sweden, we defend our country, we defend our freedom, our way of living. And the Swedish Armed Forces must be considered relevant and in the society, and we need confidence in us and our activities. All citizens have the right and maybe the obligations to participate in the defense of Sweden. For me, it's obvious that both men and women should be included in this work. We also like to attract the best boys and girls. And please notice the word here, the best boys and girls. The best doesn't necessarily means the biggest or the fastest or the toughest or the strongest. It means the best. And we need to bring in a broader perspective to our armed forces. And if this is true, as I explained just now, why do we look into only half of the population? So that is one of the main reasons. And we also had the operational issue mentioned in the introductory remarks here. Gender equality contributes to operational effect. We have so many lessons in the Swedish Armed Forces from our missions abroad, where female soldiers and female officers had made critical contributions to missions. For example, in Afghanistan, and as some of you know, maybe some of our military friends here knows about the MOT team Juliet, very famous, a female MOT team, trying to reach the Afghan female population, and they turned out to be a very good way to do that. So these three main perspectives was the baseline for the Swedish government in March 2017, when they decided to reintroduce a gender conscript, a neutral gender conscript system. So if I conclude it, relevance and trust in the society, the best boys and girls with new perspectives, and operational benefits. And so far, it has made a great difference in the Swedish Armed Forces. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have some time for questions and discussion, also from the audience. I think there are microphones. If you want to raise your hand and tag into the discussion, just do so. Yes? Over there, please. I don't see, so yes. Was there someone over here? Yeah. Okay. For that, yeah. But no questions. Yes, here we are up front.
Thank you. That was a very positive discussion. I'm just interested in how much resistance there is to these ideas, and how much resistance do you find in your day-to-day work? Have attitudes fundamentally changed, or are there still substantial minorities or groups that think that this is a form of misguided political correctness, that ultimately this is diminishing combat effectiveness, etc., and so on? Are there still people who believe that? Do you run into those? Or is that sort of a completely obsolete set of beliefs that has vanished over time?
So, yes, a very good question on the resistance that you still experience or not within your organizations. Yes, please.
I think when I entered, I also felt some resistance, especially in the beginning. And up to me, I had the impression that those who went to schools where boys and girls were separated, which was the case in Belgium, because I was, when I went to the secondary school, I was 12 years old, and at that time, that was the first year that that girls and boys are together in the classes in the secondary school. And I had the impression that those who were elevated in schools who were separated, that for them it was much more difficult to accept women, that the new generation who came after me, and they were much more used to this. And for them it was just normal to work together with women too.
The short answer is yes. The longer answer is that normally military forces are quite conservative compared to societies. Societies evolve. In the societies represented in this audience in a liberal direction, and military forces follow them slowly, generally with complaints, and then once they make the leap of, in the British Army, for example, accepting women into the infantry, they then find that after all it wasn't much of a fuss and everybody just forgets about it very quickly and it becomes a new normal. I contrast this with some work I'm doing with the Iraqi Peshmerga. Now, the Iraqi Peshmerga has an all-female battalion that's been engaged in direct combat with ISIS and has suffered what they term martyrs. Now, the Iraqi Peshmerga would emphasize that they are liberal. They describe themselves as liberal, more liberal than the Iraqis, certainly. And I wonder if in this case, we have a case of a military force, through its liberal agenda, bringing society forward behind it. I've got no evidence for that, but I suspect that that may be the case in some points. So there is an opportunity that when we support other nations' militaries and perform our value systems in front of them, that we may in a small way be actually supporting the value systems of that society as a whole. And that can only be a positive effect of the military forces in this audience.
Yes? Do you have any reflection on resistance still?
Inside our armed forces, of course, there's some resistance. Sometimes, it depends. I cannot say this is a special group. Sometimes it's not the opposite of opinion. Sometimes it's unconsciousness. We call it unconscious bias. So we spend or make efforts to increase the awareness of superiors. This is, I think, one very important point. And the other point is the commitment of the top level. If you have the commitment of the top level, it's much easier to change.
Well, I think in Sweden we have been working with these issues for so long now, and it's so integrated and so well known by the armed forces. So of course there still are some problems and some resistance, but it went much better during the years. But of course there are harassments from some units, and you have problems with equipment, and so of course there are some resistance, but it's much better now than it used to be.
Yes, please.
Hello, Mrs. Brandt from the German Armed Force. I have a question to Sweden. How do you realize that the best of the best go to the army, not to the industry or go to the university?
Well, I think you're talking about recruitment in general. Well, we have that problem, of course, and one of the main problems is the salary for officers and soldiers. We can't compete with the private sector, and we can't compete. Maybe we can compete with education, but we can't compete after the education. When you are employed, you will have a too low salary. That's what I say the main problem: education.
Any more on how can we recruit the best of the best to the armed forces, especially women?
A couple of years ago, I met a woman who was a member of the American Sixth Fleet. In fact, she was the commander of the American Sixth Fleet, and I've never met someone speak with so much authority from this tiny frame. Now, that sort of positive role model to men and to women should be forefronted. The point being that you can reach the absolute nadir of a tremendously complex and important organisation if you have the quality. And I think that every opportunity that we have to do that, and in the UK now, we have many examples of women commanding regiments, including operations, UN operations. And I think that perhaps we should be less reticent to push these examples to the fore as positive role models, not just to women, but quite frankly to everybody.
Thank you. Yes, over here.
My name is Daria. I'm Polish. I study here in Warsaw at the College of Europe, and last year I specialized in security and stability in Strasbourg. And as much as I appreciate that there are so many people from different countries here, there's nobody here from Central and Eastern Europe. And I was wondering, I imagine you all have a lot of experience in international structures, and I was wondering if maybe you noticed a difference in attitudes towards women in the armed forces in Central and Eastern Europe than also in America as in comparison to your own countries.
Thank you. Anyone on the panel on the experience is there different view of? We were supposed to have a Polish speaker on the panel, but unfortunately that was cancelled. So, anyone? Yes.
I do have contact with many other navies where also women are serving. And when I talk to them, I was also talking to the girl from the German Navy, and I must say that we share almost everywhere the same experiences. So I don't have the impression that there are much differences between the different armed forces.
Thank you. Yes? Over here.
Hello, my name is Victoria Popa. I am Lieutenant in Reserve of the Army of Republic of Moldova. And my question for you is the following. Lately we speak a lot about empowering women, gender equality agenda and so on. But sometimes these reforms are just on paper. The conditions under which the women in military services are not totally efficient. What happens under this term in military forces in different countries? Thank you.
Thank you.
I think that this is a structural issue. Some countries, Eastern European countries, have independent inspectors of their armed forces, independent mechanisms that women who feel disadvantaged can apply up without going through their chain of command. Other countries have military police structures or some form of independent arbiter. And I think that this is important to make sure that the intentions, after all, of our commanders, military and our political masters, are fully realised and not get stuck in the sticky middle. So if a woman, or indeed a man, feels that in some way the rules are not giving them the level playing field that is intended, they must have an independent mechanism by which to highlight their complaints and for that to be addressed.
Any more reflections? Yes?
We discuss it very often, and we discuss it openly, and we analyze the surrounding conditions in where women are doing their job. And sometimes it's just a communication if you want to have the answers. If you don't ask the women, if you only discuss in higher superiors, you don't get the answer you need. So I think this communication process is very important. And in this communication process, we do it all over the whole country. We analyze a lot of things that we try to change. It begins with part-time, working in part-time. It's the reaction of a superior, it's changing trainings. Also, there are so many things you can do, but if you must be sure that you want to change something, I think this is the point. If you really want to change, you can change a lot. I'm convinced. Thanks.
Well, I don't know if I got your question quite right, but in Sweden there is no inspectors, nothing special for women in the armed forces. We are treating everyone equal in the I think so, I hope so. We are treating everyone equal in the armed forces. One important part that was invented, but it's a female network for female officers all over Sweden from all units, and they gather 2 or 3 times a year to discuss different issues and different questions. And if something is very important, they have a chairman who raises the question all the way up to the Supreme Commander if necessary. So that's the main working tool for female issues.
Thank you very much. Is there any last question? Because we're about time to round up this panel. No, I think we covered everyone in. Then I just wanted to say I think this has been a very rich discussion. And I think we got some answers to what is a meaningful participation of women in the armed forces. So thank you very much for that and for sharing also your personal experiences from this. I take with me that it's a question of legitimacy, it's a question of credibility, and it's also a question of actually really integrating with society and what the armed forces is for. It's about securing societies, and how do we do that in the best way? It's by recruiting more women. We still have quite a way to go, I think, everywhere. The figures are ranging between 5–15% perhaps. So even though a lot of steps have been taken, we have a lot of work to do up front. But I think this has been really inspiring. So Please join me in thanking the panelists for this discussion. Thank you.